So how does a political leader take a huge legislative defeat and flip it into a rallying cry? Well, today we're going to break down a prime minister's address to the nation, one that happened right after a major bill went down in flames. It's a fascinating look at political strategy that kicks off with an apology, but believe me, it ends with a declaration of war.
Right off the bat, the speech doesn't start with dry policy talk or parliamentary rules. Nope, it begins right here with this incredibly emotional line. By framing the bill's failure as dreams brutally crushed, the Prime Minister immediately turns this from a simple political loss into a huge national tragedy. It's a powerful opening move.
So what was this bill that caused such a firestorm? It was called the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, better known as the Women's Reservation Bill. And its goal was massive, really transformative. It aimed to actually amend the Constitution to set aside 1/3 of all seats in India's national and state legislatures specifically for women.
Okay, so let's get into how the speech tackles this failure head-on. The first part is all about addressing the immediate aftermath and framing this whole thing as a solemn promise that was left unfulfilled.
And this is the cold, hard fact that sparked the entire address. You see, to pass a constitutional amendment, you need a special 2/3 majority in Parliament. That is a very, very high bar to clear. And despite the government's best efforts, the bill just didn't get the numbers. It failed.
Now, this is a really crucial strategic choice. The speech doesn't open with excuses or by pointing fingers. It starts with a personal, direct apology to the mothers, sisters, and daughters of India for not being able to deliver on this big promise.
But listen, that apology? That was just the opening act. It very quickly pivots into a pretty serious accusation. The narrative shifts from a simple failure to get votes to a deliberate act of political sabotage.
And the Prime Minister didn't just leave it vague. The speech gets very specific, calling out 4 major opposition parties by name. They're accused of putting their own selfish politics ahead of what the speech calls the nation's progress.
And to really make this accusation stick, the address paints this incredibly vivid and pretty damning picture of the scene in Parliament. It claims that instead of being disappointed, these opposition members were actually joyful, happily clapping and thumping tables in celebration the very moment the bill was defeated.
And this next point really shows you the seriousness of the charge. The speech uses this incredibly powerful and emotionally loaded metaphor, bhrun hatya, which translates to foeticide, to describe what happened. It frames the bill's failure as nothing less than a crime against the future of the nation's women.
But why, right? Why would any political party, according to the speech, want to sabotage such a popular bill? Well, the address offers a very specific motive, a deep-seated fear of empowered women.
So, the core argument presented is that the opposition is made up of what are called dynastic parties, political groups where leadership is often handed down within families. The alleged fear isn't about women having power in general, it's about the empowerment of ordinary women from outside their own political families. So from this point of view, the goal wasn't about policy at all. It was about protecting their own family's grip on power.
This direct quote from the address really just boils it all down. The argument is that the opposition's actions are all about keeping a closed circle, making sure that only women from inside their own dynasties ever really get to advance.
Okay, so from that specific accusation, the speech then kind of zooms out to the bigger picture. It argues that this incident wasn't a one-off thing. Instead, it's framed as just the latest chapter in a long, consistent pattern of opposition.
And to build this historical case, the speech pins a specific label on the main opposition party, Congress, calling them an anti-reform party. The implication here is that they have a default setting, and that setting is no when it comes to any major national change.
And to back this up, the speech basically runs through a highlight reel of major government initiatives. You can see some of them listed here, from huge economic reforms like GST to really controversial constitutional changes. The argument being made is that for every single step forward, the opposition has consistently tried to pull the country backward.
All right, so after laying out this whole history of alleged obstruction, the tone of the speech shifts dramatically for the grand finale. It moves away from accusation and pivots toward a message of hope and a final, determined vow.
Now here, the Prime Minister makes a really bold rhetorical move. He admits they didn't get the votes in Parliament, they didn't hit that 2/3 mark, but he says they have something even more powerful, the 100% blessing of Nari Shakti, or the nation's woman power.
And this is what it all builds to. The entire address culminates in this one definitive promise. It's a direct assurance to the women of India that the government is not giving up, and that, in the end, they will remove every single obstacle to make women's reservation a reality.
So, as you can see, this speech wasn't just an explanation for a failure. It was the declaration of a whole new political battlefront. It reframed the entire issue as a fight against obstructionism and wrapped it up with a firm promise for the future. And that leaves us with a huge question to think about as this story continues to unfold.